Wildlife, Chapter 3, Part 2. As Big Darrell drove slowly down a street that was lined with boarded-up, dingy storefronts, Eric looked around with a sinking heart. Everything was dusty and rusty and old. He thought that a buzzard would be a far more appropriate symbol for the place than a pheasant. He knew right then that that he wasn't going to love Fortuna, not one bit. There were clues, such as the presence of cars and tractors, a string of limp telephone wires lining the street, and a satellite dish on a rooftop that told him he hadn't actually gone back in time to the old Wild West, but he sure as heck knew a ghost town when he saw one. Chapter 4. Big Darrell pulled into a dumpy-looking gas station Eric would have guessed was out of business, and got out to work the pump. Fortuna's only got a few streets, Oma explained while she and Eric waited, so it's real simple to find your way around. Eric almost said what he was thinking, as if anybody could possibly get lost in such a dinky place. As the businesses are closed now, Oma went on, except for this gas station and the tavern. She pointed to a dilapidated building with a neon beer advertisement in the window. We have to go clear to Crosby for groceries. There's only 11 houses here that still have folks living in them. They had passed a few houses, all of which had a sad, run-down look. Eric wasn't convinced that people actually lived in any of them. There was a lot of old stuff scattered about the yards, too. Rusty car bodies and farm machinery, a bike, a washing machine, a deflated plastic swimming pool. It was hard to figure why people would keep junk like that around. It wasn't as if there was nowhere else to put it. There was nothing but empty space out here. He felt his spirits dip even lower. Mom said you sold the farm. Where's your house? He asked, hoping it wasn't one of the ones he'd already seen. Oh, we don't live here in town, said Oma. We still live out at the farm where your mama grew up. We just sold the land. Jim Lund bought it. Big Darrell still works with Jim every day. You can't imagine Big Darrell not farming, can you? Eric didn't know what to say to that, so he didn't answer. Instead, he said, Where is the farm? I guess you don't remember much from your visit. It was such a long time ago, Oma answered. Oh, it's out a ways. Out a ways turned out to be miles down a part dirt and part gravel road off the main highway. It was beginning to get dark. As they jounced along over the ruts, 3 deer appeared, seemingly out of nowhere, running across a field to the right of the truck. Eric knew immediately that they were mule deer, not whitetails like they had in New York. These were the first muleys he'd ever seen. He couldn't wait to tell Patrick about them. Oma noticed him looking at them and patted his knee. We have to be real careful driving at night around here. The deer start moving at dusk. I can't think of a soul who hasn't had a run-in with one, or at least a close call. Can you, Big Darrell? Big Darrell might have shaken his head no, but it was hard to tell. A little farther along, Eric was amazed to see a group of about 20 pheasants standing on the end of the ditch by the side of the road. He couldn't help reaching across his grandfather to point, crying out, Look, over there, pheasants, a bunch of them. Oh, heavens, there's pheasants all over the place this year, Oma declared. Last year we had a mild winter, so they did real well. Jim Lund was just saying yesterday you could hardly swing a dead cat without hitting one. Eric twisted around in his seat so he could watch the birds until they were out of sight. What are they all doing in the road? He wondered out loud. Oh, they're out in the crops all day eating, Big Darrell said, heading back to cover for the night. It seemed to Eric as if his grandfather had spoken in spite of himself, almost as if the words had forced themselves from between his lips. Still, these were more words than he had uttered all afternoon. Encouraged, Eric asked, Can we hunt them? Both Big Darrell and Oma stiffened in their seats, and a charged silence filled the truck cab. Finally, Oma said quietly, Big Darrell's too busy for hunting these days. Eric suddenly felt desperate to escape the tense, strained atmosphere in the small enclosure of the truck's cab. His brief feeling of happiness at seeing the deer and pheasants drained away. Oma broke the silence finally, saying in an overly cheery voice, "Well, here we are." On the right, a gravel driveway led to a 2-story wooden farmhouse. Eric searched his memory, but he had no feeling of recognition for the place. He could tell the house had once been painted white, and the 2 shutters that were left had once been red. The roof sagged, and the whole thing sort of slumped to the left, as if it had grown weary of fighting the wind. Everything looked old and poor and ready to give up. There was a big barn, too, and some smaller buildings, and a lot of large farm machinery, like tractors and combines and others he didn't know the names of. As Big Darrell pulled up beside a pile of neatly stacked firewood, Eric pointed to a narrow little building with the shape of a crescent moon cut into the door. Is that what I think it is?" he asked. "Why, that's the outhouse, Eric," Oma answered. His face must have shown his dismay, because Oma laughed and added, "There's a bathroom inside, but the outhouse comes in handy during mud season when the men are out here working and their boots get all dirty." Eric thought, "If my feet get muddy, I'm taking off my shoes and going inside." Oma got out of the truck with a low groan. "Come on in," she said, "but mind the porch steps. One's broken. Stay to the right when you go up." Big Darrell got Eric's suitcases from the truck bed and walked toward the house. Eric's legs were numb from the long ride, and he had to force himself to move. When he slid from the truck seat to the ground, a fierce blast of wind snatched at him, nearly knocking him over. Pushing his hair out of his eyes, he looked around in the gathering darkness. There wasn't another house as far as he could see. There were fields and a straight line of trees to one side of the house, which he figured had been planted in a vain effort to try to break the wind. The trees led to a low area where some scrubby-looking bushes grew. There might have been a pond down there, but it was too dark now to tell. The first stars were appearing, and as he looked up at them he felt dizzy, lost in all the endless space stretching out in every direction. He closed his eyes as he was buffered by another blast of wind. The wind here was different from at home. Here it seemed to him to have a will of its own, as if it were determined to clear the land of anything too weak to withstand its relentless pressure. He bent into it and climbed onto the porch, being careful to put his weight on the only 2 steps that looked solid, and went into the house. Oma stood at the bottom of the stairs that led up to the 2nd floor. "I'll show you your room. You go first. These old legs of mine are awful slow." Wordlessly, Big Darrell handed over one of the suitcases, and Eric started up the stairs with it. Oma came next, and Big Darrell followed with the other suitcase. Eric hesitated at the top, then reached for the knob on the first door he came to. He was about to turn it when Oma drew a sharp breath. "No," Big Darrell said. The single word, spoken forcefully in his deep, hoarse voice, hung in the air. Eric pulled back his hand in surprise and turned around. Big Darrell's face was hidden in the shadows, but Oma's eyes were wide with alarm. Quickly she recovered herself and gave a small, nervous laugh. "Not that one, Eric. The next one, farther down on the right." Slowly, Eric turned to the door across the hall, half expecting another outburst, but Oma opened it and flicked a light switch. Sounding slightly out of breath, she said, "Here you are." Without speaking, Big Darrell set the suitcase on the floor in the hallway and went back down the stairs. Oma and Eric stood looking around the room. "Just like your mama left it," Oma said, "except we've ended up storing a few things in here. You know how that goes." "A few things?" Eric thought incredulously. There was a single bed, covered neatly in a faded blue flowered spread, and a dresser with a mirror attached. But the floor was piled with random stuff. A fake Christmas tree in a stand, a sewing machine, cardboard boxes, and several bulging plastic bags. A narrow path snaked through it all, making it possible to walk from the door to the dresser or from the door to the bed. "Doesn't anybody around here ever throw anything out?" Eric wondered. Oma was looking around too, with a funny expression on her face. He had the feeling she was really seeing the room for the first time in a while. I expect we'll need to move some of this to the attic, she said uncertainly. Give you a little more space. When Eric didn't say anything, Oma said, You just go ahead and make yourself at home now while I get some supper started. Eric had a sudden hopeful thought. The school? He said. Is it closed too, like all the stores in town? Oh, there's no school in Fortuna, she said. Wow, he thought, I have actually come to a place so far out in the middle of nowhere that there isn't even a school. This news would have been thrilling if he could have thought of one thing to do here besides going to school. Oma said, You'll be going to the Crosby Middle School. I let them know you were coming, and the bus will be stopping for you out by the highway. Eric didn't know whether to feel disappointed or relieved. He'd been trying hard not to think about the prospect of starting school at a new place where he didn't know anybody. But what was he going to do with himself for the next 2 days before school began on Monday? When Oma left, Eric sat on the bed, looking around the tiny room. This must be what it felt like to be in a jail cell in Siberia, except his cell had the added attraction of being filled with junk. Stay tuned next time for Chapter 5.